Imagine standing at the edge of existence itself, where the line between survival and extinction is thinner than a whisper. There are places on this planet, hidden corners of our world, where life clings on with such fragility that every sunrise might be the last for an entire species. We share this earth with millions of creatures, but some have been pushed so far toward the brink that their numbers can be counted on a single hand. 3 individuals, 3 heartbeats. 3 last chances to preserve something irreplaceable that evolution spent millions of years creating. When we think about rarity, our minds often drift to precious gems buried deep in mountain veins or ancient artifacts locked away in museum vaults. But no diamond, no golden relic can compare to the value of a living being that represents the final thread connecting us to an entire lineage of life. These animals are not just rare in the way that something is difficult to find. They are rare in a way that makes every moment of their existence a countdown, a biological hourglass where each grain of sand represents not just time, but the possibility of forever losing something we can never recreate. The story of these creatures begins not with their scarcity, but with their abundance. Decades ago, perhaps even within living memory, some of these animals roamed their habitats in numbers that seemed limitless. They were woven into the fabric of their ecosystems, playing roles that kept entire environments in balance. But then, something changed. Human expansion crept into their territories like a slow tide, and with it came the machinery of progress that had little regard for the delicate systems it disrupted. Forests that had stood for thousands of years fell in mere seasons. Rivers that had flowed clear and cold became clouded with sediment and chemicals. The wild places that were once sanctuaries became fragmented patches, isolated islands in a sea of development. Consider for a moment the Javan Rhinoceros, a creature that once thundered through the dense tropical forests of Southeast Asia. This magnificent animal, with its thick, armor-like skin folded into natural plates that give it an almost prehistoric appearance, now exists in numbers so small that encountering one in the wild would be like witnessing a ghost from another age. The Javan rhino once ranged across a vast territory, stretching from northeastern India through Myanmar, Thailand, and down through the Indonesian archipelago. These forests, steaming and alive with the calls of gibbons and the rustle of countless unseen creatures, were the rhino's kingdom. They would move through the undergrowth with surprising quietness for animals weighing nearly 2 tons, browsing on young saplings and fallen fruit, their presence shaping the very structure of the forest around them. But as human populations exploded and the demand for land grew insatiable, these forests began to shrink. The Javan rhino faced threats from every direction. Farmers cleared land for agriculture, cutting down the trees that formed the rhino's shelter and food source. Poachers hunted them relentlessly, driven by the belief in certain cultures that rhino horn possessed medicinal properties, despite no scientific evidence supporting such claims. The horn, made of keratin, the same substance as human fingernails, became more valuable than gold on the black market. Wars and political instability made conservation efforts nearly impossible in many regions. One by one, the populations winked out. Vietnam lost its last Javan rhino in recent years, and now the species clings to existence in a single location, Ujung Kulon National Park on the western tip of Java. Today, fewer than 80 Javan rhinos remain, and within that already devastatingly small number, there have been times when certain subpopulations or closely monitored groups have dwindled to just 3 or 4 individuals. These animals live in a landscape that is both paradise and prison. The park offers them protection, yes, but it also represents the absolute limit of their world. They cannot expand beyond its borders without encountering the human developments that caused their decline in the first place. Every single one of these rhinos carries with it the weight of an entire species' future. When they browse on vegetation at dawn, when they wallow in muddy streams to cool themselves, when they leave their footprints in the soft earth, they are writing a story that might end with their generation. The ecosystem they inhabit depends on them in ways we are only beginning to understand. As large herbivores, Javan rhinos act as gardeners of the forest. They create clearings where they feed, allowing sunlight to reach the forest floor and giving smaller plants a chance to grow. They disperse seeds through their dung, spreading plant species across the landscape. Their wallowing creates pools that other animals use for water and bathing. Without them, the forest would be fundamentally different, less diverse, less resilient. And yet, with so few remaining, they are already becoming ecological ghosts, present but unable to fulfill their role at the scale nature intended. Moving from the steaming forests of Java to the frigid waters of the northern Pacific, we encounter another creature pushed to the very edge of existence. The vaquita, a small porpoise found only in the upper Gulf of California, holds the tragic distinction of being the world's most endangered marine mammal. These shy, elusive creatures are the smallest of all cetaceans, measuring just 5 feet in length and bearing distinctive dark rings around their eyes and curved lines on their lips that give them the appearance of wearing a gentle smile. They are the pandas of the sea, though far fewer people have heard their name or understand the crisis they face. The vaquita's story is one of unintended consequences and human appetite. These porpoises never numbered in the millions, like some species. Scientists estimate that even at their historical peak, perhaps only a few thousand vaquitas lived in the Gulf. But they were stable, adapted perfectly to their small range where the Colorado River once met the sea. The waters there were rich with nutrients, supporting abundant fish populations that the vaquitas fed upon. Then came the fishing industry, growing more mechanized and efficient with each passing decade. The vaquitas themselves were never the target. Instead, they became what biologists call bycatch, the unintended victims of nets set for other species. The situation grew critical when demand exploded for the swim bladder of a fish called the totoaba. This large fish shares the vaquita's habitat, and its swim bladder is considered a delicacy in some Asian markets, where it can sell for tens of thousands of dollars. Illegal gill nets, walls of netting that hang in the water like invisible curtains, were set throughout the Gulf to catch totoaba. But gill nets are indiscriminate killers. Vaquitas, needing to surface to breathe, became entangled in these nets and drowned. The decline was swift and merciless. From perhaps 600 individuals in the late 1990 seconds, the population crashed to fewer than 30 by the mid-2010 seconds. Recent surveys suggest that fewer than a dozen vaquitas may remain alive today. There have been stretches where researchers could only confirm the existence of 3 individuals through acoustic monitoring and rare visual sightings. Picture the vastness of the ocean, even this relatively small portion of it, and then imagine searching for 3 small porpoises. They surface briefly to breathe, just a quick inhalation before disappearing again beneath the waves. They are quiet, cautious, evolved to be inconspicuous in a world where being noticed might mean becoming prey. Now they are trying to hide from something far more deadly than any natural predator. Conservation efforts have tried everything from net removal patrols to creating safe zones to even attempting to capture vaquitas for breeding in captivity, though that effort ended tragically when a captured vaquita died from stress. The Mexican government has banned gillnet fishing in the vaquita's range, but enforcement is difficult when the profits from illegal fishing are so enormous. Every vaquita that remains is a small miracle, a testament to the species' tenacity, but also a reminder of how quickly we can destroy something precious through our carelessness and greed. The waters where the vaquitas struggle to survive are not just their home, but an entire ecosystem that is unraveling. The Colorado River, which once poured freshwater and sediment into the Gulf, creating a unique mixing zone of extraordinary productivity, has been dammed and diverted so heavily that it now barely reaches the sea. The delicate balance of salinity, temperature, and nutrients that made this region so rich is changing. The vaquita is the most visible casualty, but it is not the only one. The entire community of life in these waters is under stress, from the smallest plankton to the largest fish. Turning our attention to yet another crisis, we find ourselves in the lush, mountainous forests of China's Hainan Island. Here, among towering trees draped in moss and mist, once lived a population of gibbons that sang through the canopy each morning, their melodious calls echoing across the valleys. The Hainan gibbon is arguably the world's rarest primate. Recent counts have identified as few as 30 individuals, and within that group, there have been family units reduced to just 3 members, clinging to survival in a forest fragment that represents a tiny fraction of their historical range. Gibbons are among the most specialized of all primates, perfectly adapted for life in the trees. Their long arms, which can span 5 or 6 feet, allow them to swing through the canopy with breathtaking grace and speed. They rarely descend to the ground, spending their entire lives in the upper reaches of the forest where they feed on fruit, leaves, and flowers. They live in small family groups, typically a mated pair and their offspring, and they are known for their remarkable vocal displays. Each morning, gibbon pairs perform elaborate duets, complex songs that strengthen their bond and announce their territory to neighboring groups. These songs are among the most beautiful sounds in nature, rising and falling in pitch, perfectly synchronized between male and female. But the forests of Hainan have been under assault for decades. Logging, agricultural expansion, and human settlement have reduced the gibbon's habitat by more than 95%. What remains are isolated patches, and the Hainan gibbons now survive in just one location, the Bawangling National Nature Reserve. The population bottleneck they have passed through is so severe that their genetic diversity is perilously low. Every individual is closely related, which means that any disease or environmental shock could potentially wipe out the entire species. There have been years when no infants were born, when conservationists watched and waited anxiously to see if this would be the generation that finally failed. The gibbons face challenges that go beyond just having enough forest to live in. Their social structure means they need space not just for one family, but for multiple family groups that can interact, allowing young gibbons to disperse and find mates outside their immediate relatives. With only 30 individuals spread across a limited area, finding an unrelated mate is becoming increasingly difficult. Some family groups consist of just 3 individuals, perhaps a breeding pair and a single offspring, and if anything happens to the breeding adults, that offspring might find itself utterly alone, the last of its family line, with no possibility of continuing its genetic legacy. The world that these Hainan gibbons inhabit is hauntingly beautiful. Mist rises from the valleys in the early morning, wrapping the mountains in layers of white and gray. The forest is a tapestry of greens, from the deep emerald of mature leaves to the bright lime of new growth. Orchids bloom in the crooks of tree branches, and butterflies drift through shafts of sunlight that pierce the canopy. It is a place that feels ancient and sacred, and the fact that it now holds the last of an entire species gives it an almost unbearable poignancy. Every morning when the gibbons sing, they are performing a ritual that has been carried out for millions of years, and every morning there is the possibility that this could be the last time those songs are heard. These 3 examples, the Javan Rhinoceros, the Vaquita Porpoise, and the Hainan Gibbon, represent just a small fraction of the species currently teetering on the brink of extinction. But they illustrate the common threads that run through nearly every extinction crisis. Habitat destruction ranks as the primary threat, whether it is forests being cleared for agriculture, rivers being dammed for water and power, or coastal areas being developed for human use. When we destroy habitat, we are not just removing trees or changing the landscape. We are dismantling complex systems that took millennia to develop, systems where every species plays a role and depends on others for survival. The second major threat is direct exploitation. Poaching and illegal trade drive many species toward extinction, fueled by demand for animal parts that are believed, often without any scientific basis, to have medicinal properties or status value. Rhino horn, tiger bone, pangolin scales, and countless other products are trafficked around the world despite international laws meant to protect endangered species. The economics of this trade are such that the rarer a species becomes, the more valuable its parts become, creating a perverse incentive that accelerates extinction rather than preventing it. Climate change now adds another layer of threat, altering habitats faster than many species can adapt. Temperature changes affect breeding cycles, shift the ranges of prey, species, and can make previously suitable habitats uninhabitable. For species already reduced to tiny populations in small areas, climate change can be the final blow, the stress that pushes them past the point of no return. But perhaps the most insidious threat is the simple fact of small population size itself. Once a species drops below a certain threshold, it enters what biologists call an extinction vortex. Genetic diversity declines because there are fewer individuals to reproduce, which means less variation for natural selection to work with. This makes the population more vulnerable to diseases and less able to adapt to changes. Small populations are also subject to random demographic fluctuations. If by chance several breeding-age females die in a short period, the population might not be able to recover. Environmental events that a larger population could absorb, like a particularly harsh season or a localized disease outbreak, can devastate a tiny population. When a species reaches the point where only 3 individuals remain, every aspect of their existence becomes critical. Where they live, what they eat, whether they can find mates, if they successfully reproduce, and whether their offspring survive to adulthood, all determine whether the species continues or disappears forever. Conservation at this stage becomes incredibly intensive and expensive. It might involve round-the-clock monitoring, habitat management, protection from poachers, veterinary intervention if animals become sick or injured, and sometimes captive breeding programs if wild breeding fails. The question that haunts conservationists is whether it is already too late. Can a species recover from such low numbers? History offers both hope and caution. Some species have been brought back from the brink. The California condor was reduced to just 27 individuals before an intensive captive breeding program began rebuilding the population. The black-footed ferret survived with only 18 individuals remaining in the wild, and through careful management has been reintroduced to multiple sites. But for every success story, there are species that could not be saved despite the best efforts. The Yangtze River dolphin is now considered functionally extinct. The Pyrenean ibex was brought to actual extinction, and even an attempt to clone the species from preserved tissue failed when the single cloned offspring died shortly after birth. What makes these losses so profound is not just that we lose the animals themselves, but that we lose everything they represent. Each species is a unique solution to the challenge of survival, shaped by millions of years of evolution. Their DNA contains information about how life can adapt to specific environments. Their behaviors, their physical structures, their relationships with other species are all part of the vast library of life on Earth. When a species goes extinct, we lose that knowledge forever. We also lose the ecological role they played. Ecosystems are not simple collections of species, but intricate webs of relationships. Remove one strand, and the whole web weakens. For humans, there are also direct consequences to these extinctions. Many medicines have been derived from plants and animals, and we have barely scratched the surface of investigating the potential medical applications of most species. The loss of biodiversity can affect ecosystem services we depend on, like pollination of crops, water purification, and climate regulation. There are also cultural and spiritual losses. For many indigenous peoples, certain animals are sacred, woven into their stories, traditions, and sense of identity. When those animals disappear, something irreplaceable is taken from human culture as well. Standing at this precipice, looking at species reduced to mere handfuls of individuals, we are forced to confront uncomfortable truths about our relationship with the natural world. We have become the dominant force, shaping life on Earth. With the power to preserve or destroy, the extinction crisis we face now is not a natural fluctuation, but the result of human actions. We have cleared too much land, taken too many resources, polluted too much water and air, and changed the climate too quickly. The consequences are playing out in real time, measured in the shrinking populations of thousands of species. Yet there is also reason for hope, fragile as it may be. Every day, people around the world are working to save these species. Rangers patrol protected areas, risking their lives to stop poachers. Scientists develop new techniques for monitoring and breeding endangered animals. Communities near critical habitats are finding ways to live alongside endangered species and benefit from conservation rather than being harmed by it. Governments are creating new protected areas and strengthening enforcement of wildlife laws. It is painstaking work, often with more setbacks than successes, but it is being done. The survival of species like the Javan rhino, the Vaquita, and the Hainan Gibbon depends ultimately on whether we decide they matter enough to save. This requires more than just caring about them in an abstract way. It requires concrete actions, funding for conservation, political will to enforce protections, and changes to the economic systems that incentivize habitat destruction and illegal wildlife trade. It requires us to see these animals not as separate from ourselves, but as part of the same living system we depend on. When only 3 individuals remain, every single one becomes infinitely precious. They are not just animals, but living symbols of what we stand to lose and what we still might save. Their existence asks us a fundamental question about what kind of world we want to leave behind. Will it be a world where we manage to step back from the brink, where we made the hard choices necessary to preserve life in all its diversity? Or will it be a world diminished, where silence replaces the songs of gibbons, where vast empty forests hold no rhinos, where the Gulf of California's waters flow without the Vaquita's gentle presence? The answer to that question is being written right now, in this moment, through actions taken and actions avoided. These 3 individuals, wherever they are in the world, are continuing to live their lives, unaware of the enormous weight they carry. They are eating, sleeping, perhaps calling out to others of their kind, following instincts honed over millions of years. They are doing what life does, which is to persist, to continue, to try. The question is whether we will give them the chance to succeed, whether we will protect the spaces they need, stop the threats they face, and allow their numbers to grow again from 3 to 30 to 300. This is not someone else's problem to solve. It is the responsibility of everyone who shares this planet, because these animals belong to all of us. They are part of our heritage as a species, part of the magnificent diversity of life that makes Earth unique in the known universe. In their struggle for survival, we see reflected our own relationship with nature, our own choices about what we value and how we live. The story of these rarest animals is still being written. The final chapter is not yet determined, and in that uncertainty lies both a warning and an invitation. The warning is clear. We are running out of time, and once these species are gone, they are gone forever. But the invitation is this: we still have the power to change the ending. We can choose to be the generation that turned things around, that learned to live sustainably, that found a way to share this world with all the other life forms that call it home. Every dawn that breaks over Ujung Kulon, over the Gulf of California, over the mountains of Hainan, is a gift and an opportunity. As long as even 3 individuals remain, there is hope. As long as there is hope, there is reason to fight. And as long as we are willing to fight for these creatures, there is a chance that their songs will continue to echo through the forests, that their forms will continue to move through the waters and across the land, not as the last of their kind, but as the ancestors of generations yet to come. That is the future worth working for, the world worth creating, and the legacy worth leaving behind.